If you've been with me for a while, and if you've been with me from the very beginning, you probably have heard this story before. And I'm going to tell it again for a few reasons. We have quite a lot of new subscribers since then, and we're talking 8 years of growth. So we have a lot of new subscribers here who tend not to backwatch content. And the story is too important, not just to me and my story, but to alternative people as a community as a whole. It's important as well. To know where you came from, to know what happened, and to know how much we've progressed. Because sometimes it's good to hear that. It's good to see that there has been a significant amount of progress when it comes to things like tolerance to certain things. And this is certainly one of those things. This is one of those stories. So another reason that I want to tell the story is that I want to tell it from another perspective with a lot more information. I have video footage from where it happened, and I want to answer a lot of the questions because I told the story again on TikTok. I want to cover those questions as well. But for baby bats, I think it's important because I feel like, again, it's good to know that as sucky as things might seem sometimes, we've come a long way. And we oftentimes, we can romanticize the 90s and we can romanticize the past as being like this amazing thing, which it was in so many different ways. But it had its down points too, and this is certainly one of them. Whereas we had that kind of ability to coexist with one another and just communicate in different ways and connect. And there was also the downside as to the way the public perceived us, because again, being in the wake of satanic panic, we were not treated great. And if we found ourselves in a position where we were victimized in any way, what ended up happening is that we were the ones that were made to be to blame. And the reason was because of the way that we looked. It kind of made us the focus of ad hominem attacks, because it's like, okay, yeah, you were assaulted, yeah, you were put on a hit list, but why are you dressed that way? Why do you look that way? So it was automatically turned around on you, whereas the person or people who perpetrated acts against you, they just sort of got away free. And this is something that's been buried, and I don't know why. So firstly, I'm going to tell you what it is. So when I was a freshman in high school, I was 14 going on 15. Depending upon the time of year, I might have been 15 already. There was something at my school called Beat the Freak Week. And what this was is essentially it started with the jocks compiling a hit list of every single freak or alternative person that they didn't like at our school or stood out the most, and they put them on a list as a target of attack. And they were fully capable and fully ready to carry out those attacks. This is a pretty serious thing. Now, news of this came out through the grapevine, and it kind of fell onto the ears of other people, and it was discussed. And we were freaked out, we were afraid. And some parents, they kept their kids home. Other parents talked to the school. Other parents were like, because again, you have to understand during this period, if you're a child of the 90s, it means you came up in the 80s, it means your parents are from like the 60s and 70s, and they have that very standoff kind of parenting style to where they're like, a little violence will put some hair on your chest. There was minimal support in the home versus what we have today. Now, there were the exceptions where a lot of kids did have like good support in the home, but it was more than likely the kid was left to their own devices, and things like that weren't really taken very seriously, not like today. During this period, this was what I call kind of my alternative transition. So when I first got to school, I started school being alternative, but I didn't physically go through that transition just yet. And I was, however, being bullied really bad. And it was classic coward bullying technique where the one person that was like the ringleader of the bullying that had beef with me, they never confronted you by themselves. They always had a group with them. So it was always 5-on-1. So you can never actually confront the individual by them. I actually did confront her. I won't go into that because I don't want to condone what I did. But it just goes to show that people, when they get in a group, there's this mob mentality that kind of forms, and it can sometimes be dangerous. And that's exactly what happened in this case. It became a them against us situation. So this was a week, nearly 2 weeks, where every single student that was alternative in any way was subject to attack. So they did make this hit list, and they did have this hit list in mind. And the thing about this hit list is it was not gender exclusive. Yeah, it was a bunch of jock guys that wrote this list, but there were girls on this list. And they didn't hold back. Exactly what they wanted to dole out on the boys, they did it to the girls too. We had a staircase in the school. It was called, I'm going to call them the unaliving stairs. But these stairs were incredibly tall and incredibly steep. And there were people thrown down those stairs. There were police at our school multiple times a day. Different news outlets were at our school every other day, and there was news coverage on the local news, News 12 Long Island, the New York Post. It even gained attention nationally. This was talked about. This was covered. So parents knew, everybody knew. There were emergency meetings called by the school board. And what freaks me out about this is that you cannot find anything anywhere. I even contacted News 12 to see if they can find anything in the archives, and there's nothing. You can find archives on a duck race from 1987, but you can't find this. But I digress. The crazy thing about all of this is that there was a huge disparity between teachers, faculty versus students. Again, this is one of the biggest high schools in the nation, biggest school districts in the nation, to the point where they had to separate us between two different schools. That's how big the school was. But when it came to the chaos that had ensued, there was no way that they can keep us in control. There was no way that they could protect us. Police were there, police were showing up, police were leaving, but the violence continued. And given the disparity between students versus teachers, it got to a point where they called us all in and they put us into the auditorium, and they shut and locked the doors and they barred them. During passing time, when the bell rang, they all knew where all the students were, and they were banging on the doors. This video is taken by a guy who went to Sachem South around the same time as myself. He has a child that attends the school now, so he was able to take a few videos for nostalgia's sake. The captions are his. Sachem South is no longer a high school, it's now a junior high, and it still blows my mind to think about because strangely, that school holds so much power in my mind. A lot has happened within those four walls, and there was this chaotic energy, and the kids were wild. You walked into that school a bundle of everything, still dusted with junior high school dust. And then you only spent 2 years in that school, 9th and 10th grade, and by the end of 10th grade, you were changed. Everyone found themselves just in time to transition to Sachem North, just across the field. And there was this common notion that South is where the kids got all of the crazy out of their system and were nice and sedate by the time they made it to North for 11th and 12th. Words cannot explain how much truth there is to that statement. These are the infamous unaliving stairs. And these are the doors to the auditorium where faculty held alternative kids in an attempt to protect them. I myself, going through this period, I was going through what I refer to as my transitional period, where I had listened to alternative music and all of my friends were all alternative. That was my crew. That was my group that I resonated with the most, because I was always a weird and awkward kid. And I was even a weirder and more awkward teenager, to which I didn't kind of put two and two together that, you know what, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not like, not like the normal kids. I'm not like the normies. I tend to suit more of an alternative personality type, and these are my people. I don't in any way feel like I am out of my element or speaking to anybody that is alien to me. We are very much like on the same wavelength, and I've always felt that way. And I've always been so grateful that I've been able to find that. So despite me kind of being of that mindset and listening to the music, it was still very new to where I was physically transitioning. I don't mean to make it sound like I was a vampire, but but I was physically transitioning to where I was only kind of slowly dabbling in the clothes and kind of slowly incorporating more alternative things into my wardrobe, because it was still something very new to me. It was something that I really enjoyed, and it was something that really did resonate with me, and it was clothing that felt more me. But at the same time, it was a big transition. And even though they felt more me and I felt more in my own skin in alternative clothes, it was still something that I had to do gradually. And I was like right smack dab in the middle of that transition. So being in the middle of that transition, I didn't find myself on any list but that still didn't make me any less protective of my friends. And what I ended up doing is this situation gave me the push to kind of go whole hog, wear the clothes that suit me, wear the clothes that I feel comfortable in. And I was already there mentally, emotionally, psychologically. All of my friends are of alternative nature. All of the music I listen to is alternative. So, the only thing that was holding me back was like, the remaining 50% of the way going into alternative fashion. And seeing what my friends were going through, it was literally in the middle of Beat the Freak Week that I was dressing 100% alternative now. And the fact that I was doing it fearlessly, I think about it now. Because sometimes when we're younger, we can be a little bit reckless. We don't really think of consequence. And we do have that level of self-preservation because all kids do. You have kids who are bullied, and there are kids who know to avoid certain hallways. They know from when they're in elementary school. It's a really sad fact, but you have that natural self-preservation about you. And despite having that natural self-preservation, I still kind of had that I don't care mentality, to where I didn't really care about the consequence. And I took that experience and I'm like, no, I'm going to stand in solidarity with my friends, and I'm going to toss all my clothes out and keep all my black clothes and rip up everything else. I'm going to dress the way that I want and screw these other freaking kids. And that's when everything changed. I cut like 8 inches off my hair. I dyed it purple, and I never looked back. But this whole thing was still going on, despite my physical transformation that had nothing to do with stopping it. But I think it's important, since I share a lot of my history with you, that timelines of when these things have kind of happened they're sometimes interesting, because they can kind of pinpoint little turning points that happened in our world and when we became who we are, like the little bits and pieces that happen here and there and there. And as you lead yourself down the path, and suddenly you're picking up all of these little things and putting them into your basket, and you make it to your destination, it's like, ta-da, here I am. And during a really volatile period, the thing that I want to cover is a lot of the questions that I received over the years, as well as the questions that I got on the TikTok video. So one of the questions that were asked were, well, why didn't you fight back? And the thing is, a lot of you assume that just because we lost meant that we didn't fight back, and that's not true. There are a lot of variables that you need to consider here. And one of those things is that we were horribly outnumbered, and there was a lot more of them than they were of us. Another thing is that we were outbrawned. This list was compiled and carried out by essentially athletes. There were other people as well, but we were outbrawned in the sense that there were girls on this list. And they did not care that they were coming after females. They were going after males as well, but it was never a one-on-one situation. They never attacked one-on-one. It was always 5-on-1. Just because we may have lost the fight doesn't mean that we didn't fight back. It was just an unfortunate situation where we're outnumbered, outbrawned. Another question is, why didn't you bring a weapon to school to defend yourself? Surely this would be one of the situations where it would have been the correct response if your life was in danger. Here's the problem with that. Back then, just like now, the concept of carrying weapons, especially in school, not advisable, something that is not allowed, and I definitely do not advocate. 2, teachers, faculty, superintendent, principal, even the parents, they blamed alternative kids for this entire event. Even though we were the subject of attacks, even though we didn't perpetrate a single thing, they felt that our very existence, just by existing in the way that we do, listening to the music that we do, looking the way that we do, they felt that we provoked this entire situation. So this whole mess that they're having to deal with is our fault. So any way that they can push further blame on us and away from the normal kids, they were going to do it. And bringing a weapon to school was a surefire way to land yourself in a lot of trouble. Another question was, why didn't you just stay home from school? Surely excluding yourself from school would exclude you from any threat of violence or attacks, and this is true. Some students, they were allowed to stay home from school. Some parents took their kids out of school, but this was a very tricky period in history. because parents were very hands-off parents. It wasn't exactly the most nurturing of environments. So if you fell in the street and gashed up your legs and required medical attention because here you are bleeding out, you got in trouble for getting injured because now your parent has to take their precious time to pay attention to you. This was the way it was in a lot of households. So the parent would much rather see you go to school and let them look after their kids so they can go and either, have their quality time alone away from parenting, or they can go to work without having to worry about you in their house and what you're doing in their kitchen or for whatever reason. But this was a lot of the thing that we dealt with. So majority of the time, we were really left to our own devices. And there was a television commercial that came on 10 p.m. every single night. And it said, it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are? They had to remind our parents that they had kids. It was kind of a situation where a lot of us fended for ourselves, which was the reality of it. Another thing that people were asking, they wanted to name and shame every single one of the people that did this. I don't know. I honestly, I couldn't tell you the names. I couldn't tell you the faces. I couldn't tell you who were carrying these things out. It was essentially anybody that was an alternative that was doing this. And it was so many years ago. We're going on 28 years now, I think I want to say. I couldn't tell you. They know who they are. So this is important for a lot of people to know for a few reasons. Because number one, I think it's really important that we understand our history and we know where we came from. It's always good to know where you came from, because knowing where you came from, it kind of makes you more appreciative into where we are now. And whereas there are a lot of times that we can get frustrated with the way that things are currently and say, oh, well, this sucks. I wish things weren't this way. And there are a lot of things that do suck. But at least this is something that we can look at and say, you know what, progress. Because people aren't treated that way anymore for that reason. Because the way alternative kids were treated back then versus now, they're entirely different kettles of fish. And it's great to see, because it's great to see young alternative kids now. You have Gen Alpha, Gen Z, and they're coming up in an environment where it's a lot safer for them to express themselves, because also the bar has been raised quite a bit when it comes to what people tolerate as being out of the norm. And that's really the truth, because back when I'm wearing blue nail polish now, ironically, but when I was 15 years old, one of my first jobs was Burger King. Second job was Hot Topic. The first job was Burger King. I went for a job at Burger King, and I remember during the interviewer, she's looking at my hands. I see her. She keeps looking down at my nails, and I know exactly what she's thinking. I'm just waiting for her to say it. Now, you would never think that blue nail polish is blue. Sky is blue, water blue. Blue is a beautiful color, right? But anything unconventional colors back in the 90s were something frowned upon. You wore pink, you wore nude, you wore red, you wore clear. Anything outside those colors, and it was, So I'm going through the interview. She's asking me questions, I'm answering, but the whole time she's staring, this disgust expression at my nails, and I'm waiting for her to say it. And she said, we hire you here. The first thing you do is you take that off. We wear female colors here if you want to wear nail polish. Pink, red, none of that crap. And she was utterly disgusted and appalled at blue nail polish. So if back in the day, the concept of blue nail polish caused somebody to react so aggressively against, think about today, where you can go to Burger King and somebody has blue hair and piercings and visible tattoos. That's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. So in that respect, we have come a long way. So we got to take the victories as they come. So when it comes to baby bats, you can be appreciative of what you're able to do and what you're able to get away with now fashionably. And when it comes to being involved in the subculture, I mean, you still have people who take issue with it, but it's nowhere near what it was. But I really did want to tell that story. And as for what happened after, I think if the phenomenon itself wasn't weird and just horrifying enough, the aftermath is probably even creepier. I walked into the school, and it was like nothing had ever happened. And no one talked about it since. And I think that is probably one of the creepiest things, that the day before, police were at our school, News 12 were interviewing people, there were kids crying, there were people getting thrown down the unaliving stairs, and then the next day, like nothing happened. And that, to me, I feel like is probably what's the creepiest out of the entire thing. So I think the whole thing is a really good lesson in just being stubborn and how true to oneself a person can really be. Because when you have people who aren't really in the subculture for the right reasons, they're fashion goths, like, oh, I'm so into this is who I am, and they act obnoxiously and they dress a certain way, but they don't listen to the music. And when this whole thing happens, when a situation like this presents themselves, you watch how quick the makeup comes off and they're suddenly dressed normally and blending in amongst the crowd. But then you have the people that went to my school who doubled down. They didn't care. They were afraid. They were concerned about their well-being, but not only did they show up to school, they wore the same things they wore every day, and they stood up for themselves. Now, in a society where we're not necessarily treated the same way for being alternative, whereas we can get away with this kind of thing now because, again, people have a much bigger tolerance, we could use that in a positive way. Use it in a way to show other people that, yeah, I'm alternative. Yeah, I listen to this music. Yeah, I'm goth. But that doesn't change the fact that I am a fully capable human being, that I have all of these aspirations and these talents, and I want to make something of myself, and to show people that not every book should be judged by its cover. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed my story, and I hope that you found it in some way helpful or at least entertaining, because sometimes these things are great to know. But I'm also very interested in hearing from anyone that remembers this period and that has any information about it. If you have any news reports or anything that you could offer up, because I've been on the hunt for many, many years, so I would be very happy to hear from you. But until next time, I'll see you all later. Bye.